harmonious passion predicts greater things like positive emotions, greater levels of concentration.
In harmonious passion or HP, you drive the passion, whereas in the obsessive passion, the passion drives you.
It's hard to know what's going on with the superstars, whether or not they were successful because of their obsession or their obsessive tendencies, if that was what drilled them to success, or if this is something they needed to overcome to succeed. Because we're only getting the small slice of people who have made it to the top.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Mental Wellbeing Show. I'm Indy Dissanayake, host of the Mental Wellbeing Show and provisional psychologist. In today's episode, we are lucky enough to have Dr. Ben Schellenberg joining us to discuss all things passion. Ben is an assistant professor at the Faculty of Kinesiology and Recreation Management at the University of Manitoba, and he directs the Psychology of Sport and Leisure Activity Lab. He's also published prolifically in passion and makes for the perfect guest to dive into all things psychology of passion. So in today's deep dive, we go into why not all passion is created equal, when passion can lead to burnout and when it can lead to goal attainment and grit, and how to cultivate more harmonious passion in your own life, and much, much more. This is a really cool conversation. We dive into a bit of work psychology in more the social realm, psychology in everyday life, psychology in sport, to kind of traverse a few different domains, which is really, really fun. And I hope it's, of real value for yourself. I certainly learned a lot in terms of how I relate to the different passions in my life. And I'm trying to make some changes now to some of the things that I feel like I'm more obsessively passionate about, which you'll hear more about in this discussion. So thanks for tuning in today. I hope this adds some value to your life, and if it does, please do hit subscribe or follow, as this is how I continue to grow the show with weekly deep dives. But without further ado, let's dive into the psychology of passion with Dr. Ben Schellenberg.
Welcome to the Mental Wellbeing Show, where we take a deep dive into the wonderful worlds of psychology and mental wellbeing. Each episode, we dive into the evidence with a global subject expert and break down the science into applicable strategies so you can take steps to improving your mental well-being.
Dr. Ben Schellenberg, welcome to the Mental Wellbeing Show.
Thanks for having me.
It's fantastic to have you on. We're going to be discussing all things science and psychology of passion. This is a topic that I've certainly been interested in for a number of years. And I think in about the 30 episodes that I've had on the Mental Wellbeing Show, I put the question of what is your take on a career that you're passionate about to 5 or 6 of the researchers and guests that I've had on, which I think just shows how intrinsically interested I am, and I know many listeners are, in this topic. So to be able to dive in with a researcher in this field like yourself is a really cool opportunity, and we'll certainly get into some of the implications of passion from a career perspective. But before we dive into the nitty-gritty, Ben, it'd be good to get a bit of an understanding as to how this applies in your life, how you came to research passion yourself.
Yeah, well, I've always thought passion was quite interesting, and I guess it all sort of started when I was in graduate school. So I went to graduate school in University of British Columbia, so in Vancouver here on the west coast of Canada. For a master's, you have to choose a thesis topic. You got to do a research project and devote a lot of your time and attention to studying something. So the choice came down to passion, focusing on passion, because this is sort of a newer area in psychology that not a lot at that time had been done in sport. There'd been some, but not a whole lot. That and perfectionism. So that was my choice. Do I want to study perfectionists for the next 2 years or people who are passionate? I chose passion and have since studied a lot about passion since that time, and thought a lot about passion in my own life and other people's lives, and really enjoyed learning about people's sort of the passions they pursue.
Yeah, it seems like a very applied topic, because as I understand it, most of us, not all of us, do have something that we're passionate about, and we can certainly dive into the statistics and whatnot as well. But in terms of passions, Ben, one of the key takeaways that I found from your research is that not all passions are created equal, and there are these distinct types of passion. So can you tell us a little bit about what the different types of passions are?
That's really interesting. I mean, I would say in the early 2000s, that's when researchers in psychology started to pick up this idea of passion and really to start to take it seriously. Before that, there has been some research on passion, like in the 1990s and 80s, 70s, but that was more so in terms of romantic relationships, the hot, fiery, passionate love that people have towards another person. So passionate love is a type of love or is a component of love. And even before then, passion typically was treated as more like an emotion. You may have heard of like a crime of passion, an expression, when emotions come over somebody and they commit a crime. So passion and emotion used to be sort of synonymous. But in the early 2000s, researchers from the University of Quebec at Montreal, so Robert Vallerand was sort of the lead on that. Him and his colleagues, again, plug for Canadians, him and his colleagues started to ask questions about the things that people do and the passion that they have for certain activities, and if that's always a good thing or not. I mean, can something you love to do actually be not a great thing in your life? So they started to ask these questions and start to focus on passion, and they developed a model called the dualistic model of passion. Going back to the philosophers, they saw that all the way back to Aristotle and all the philosophers, they said, well, it looks like lots of people think that passion can be good, right? Passion can be sort of the source of energy in your life, and that's sort of what life is all about, is having passion for something. But then people said, well, passion might have some downsides, right? Crimes of passion. Passion can be sort of involve a loss of reason. So there's this passion versus reason conflict. And so there seems to be a perspective that passion can be a good thing, but also can be a bad thing. And so they developed this dualistic model of passion, which tries to recognize the fact that there's these two sides of passion. So the first type of passion that they identify is called harmonious passion. This occurs when an activity is really, when somebody loves an activity, or at least you like it a lot. It's been internalized into a person's identity. So it's not, you're passionate about playing basketball. You'd identify as a basketball player. This is part of who you are. I was trying to think of a sport that, soccer, football. So we'll go with basketball. In addition, passions are activities that you find valuable and meaningful in your life. You're not really ashamed of them, or you don't hide them away. You like to kind of share your passion with the world. And it's something that you spend a lot of time doing. But with harmonious passion, it involves a sense of control over the activity and a sense of balance and flexibility. So people with high levels of harmonious passion, they love to play basketball, but they can take a day off. Or if they get injured, they have no problem, letting the injury heal fully and then resuming. So they're very much in control of when they pursue the activity and when they take a step back from it. In contrast, the second type of passion is obsessive passion. Now, this is when you still love your activity. It's still part of your identity. You value it, but you feel a sense of pressure to do your activity, a sense of rigid persistence, like you need to do your activity. You need to follow your passion, and you feel a sense of that sort of pressure, even when you probably shouldn't, even when you should probably take a day off. Or if you're a student, maybe if you have an exam the next day that you should study, maybe you should not go to practice or skip the game to study instead. People with obsessive passion really have a hard time with that, and it kind of can become all consuming for these obsessively passionate people, and consume their identity as well. So it can be really kind of their whole identity gravitates around their passionate activity. So yeah, you've got these two types: harmonious passion, obsessive passion. The bulk of the research has been trying to understand the effects of these two types of passion.
As I understand it, they have kind of different outcomes on goal persistence, well-being, which I'd certainly want to dive into as well. But I think to help color it in, as well as having a look at kind of the passion scale, which, as I understand it, is how you guys kind of measure whether the passions are a bit more harmonious or obsessive in people. And some of the OP or obsessive passion descriptors that I think you guys use are: I cannot live without it. My mood depends on being able to do this activity. I have a tough time controlling my need for this activity. So those seem to be kind of some of the descriptors of a more obsession, just to help people kind of make that distinction. And I've also heard it, Ben, being described as like in harmonious passion or HP, you drive the passion, whereas in the obsessive passion, the passion drives you. Is that kind of accurate?
I've heard that expression before. That's a great way of putting it. With HP, harmonious passion, you're in the driver's seat. You can control when you do it, when you don't do it. Obsessive passion, there's that compulsion to engage in it. It's almost like you have to do your activity. It's almost like it's kind of not even your choice. Like you got to play basketball. You got to watch your favorite team play. People can be obsessed for many different types of activities. yeah, it's almost like their sense of control is sort of gone with obsessive passion.
So what are some of the different kind of outcomes of having more of a harmonious passion for an activity rather than an obsessive passion? Do we see different effects?
Yeah, that's been the main takeaway from research, sort of distinguishing between these two types of passions. That knowing that you're passionate about activity, that you like it, that you spend a lot of time doing it, it's part of your identity, doesn't really tell us a whole lot. We need to know more. We need to know if it's harmonious or obsessive. Then we can figure out what's going on. With harmonious passion, this is the theory is that this allows people to be fully connected when they're doing this activity because they freely choose to engage in this activity. So they could be fully present when they're, let's stick with playing basketball. If they're on the court, they could be fully present while they're playing basketball. And when they go home, when they're done playing basketball, they can completely leave basketball at the court, and they can focus on everything else that's going on in their lives. And so this should help facilitate more positive experiences during the activity and also outside of the activity in other areas. So it should kind of affect everything. And the research has supported this idea. Harmonious passion predicts greater things like positive emotions, greater levels of concentration. So some very interesting research with basketball referees, actually, assessing the levels of concentration and assessing their passion for being an official. Harmoniously passionate people or people with high HP experience more flow. So that state of total immersion in what they're doing. People like to be around people with high harmonious passion. So they have better quality relationships during the activity and also when they get home. Right? There's less conflict at home because the activity doesn't conflict with other things that are going on. When things aren't going well, harmoniously passionate people tend to engage in more problem-focused coping. They tend to deal with problems when they come up. They don't shy away from things. And harmonious passion predicts better performance too. So more harmoniously passionate people are, the more that they tend to perform better in their activity. Obsessive passion is a different story. Obsessive passion predicts more negative emotions, right? When obsessive passionate people are playing basketball, they feel more guilt and shame when things aren't going well. Maybe they feel more negativity because they know that there's things at home that they should be attending to, but they're playing basketball instead. So there's a lot of conflict there. And then when they get home, when they're not playing when they're not engaging in their activity, they're just thinking about how much they want to play their activity. So there's a lot of tension, a lot of rumination with obsessive passion as well. Low concentration, more relationship conflict because they have that conflict at home. Even things like anything having to do with their identity and being more fragile. They have this sort of fragile identity where their sense of self-worth and life satisfaction is really dependent on how they're doing in the activity. So when things are going well, life satisfaction and self-esteem increases with obsessively passionate people, but when things aren't going well, they decrease, things are not well. Anything that has to, we found some research even that they're worse apologizers when things don't go well. Apologizing requires you to be honest and low levels of defensiveness, to be vulnerable. With more obsessive passion, that's very difficult to be vulnerable and to not be defensive. And so we've done some research and asking people how would you apologize in certain situations, and they're not good apologizers, which of course is not good for relationships. And when things are going well, obsessive passion predicts more avoidance coping, show a substantial amount of distress when things aren't going well in an activity. But critically, and this is sort of one of the main takeaways, at least in sports, but research has been happening in other areas, like some of the research we have is with dancers, actually in a dancing school. There appears to be two roads to high performance, right? Harmonious passion predicts better performance, but obsessive passion also predicts higher performance. They both sort of independently predict higher performance, and it predicts achievement. So the choice, I guess, is sort of what road do you want to take, right? There's the harmonious road where you have more well-being during the activity and sort of generally in your life, and you are performing quite high. Or there's the obsessive road where, you have this relationship conflict at home, you have all these negative emotions, this lower sense of well-being, but you perform well. So that's sort of been the story with the research we've been seeing with performance.
Okay, and I've heard Bob Vallerand describe it as harmonious passion is having your cake and eating it too. So you still get to the goal, but you get to enjoy the process of doing it. If I'm honest, when I first came across this research, I really thought like obsession would have to be a prerequisite to achieve your goals and be in the top echelon of your field. But it really seems like obsession, at least in the lay person way that we describe it, isn't necessity for goal attainment and goal performance, and that, there are other ways of going about it, i.e. the more harmonious road to being the top. I think, there are a lot of pop culture examples, and we'll stick with basketball, Michael Jordan, and I'll preface this by saying everything I know about basketball comes from The Last Dance. So, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong with my basketball analogies, but he certainly strikes me as, someone who's quite fits that lay definition of obsessed. And I feel like in a lot of pop culture, particularly with athletes, that's what we're kind of bombarded with, is that to get to the top, to be the greatest, you'd have to be obsessed, but that's not quite the case.
All I can speak to, listen, you sound exactly like one of my students. All of my students have this comment. They're like, yeah, but what about Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant or any of these top level superstars that really do appear to be obsessed about what they're doing, and that obsession appears to be what drove them to be so incredible. Well, all I can say is that we have data ranging from people who are kind of new at their passion to all the way to, I think, the highest sort of elite level that we've studied sort of systematically has been like college level athletes. So these are pretty high level athletes in Canada. Then some of them go on to play on the national team. That's a pretty big range of performers, right? We're just talking about the people who are beyond the college level, would be sort of Olympians, professionals. In the populations we've studied, harmonious passion really does predict a whole lot of negative. Harmonious passion predicts a lot of positive outcomes, including performance, whereas obsessive passion predicts a lot of negative outcomes. You really don't want somebody to be really obsessed about it. It's hard to make conclusions. It's hard to know what's going on with the superstars, whether or not they were successful because of their obsession or their obsessive tendencies, if that was what drove them to success, or if this is something they needed to overcome to succeed. Because we're only getting the small slice of people who have made it to the top. You don't see all the other obsessive people who may have fallen by the wayside. They got burnt out. Things at home were so bad that they had to quit. Or, there's a lot of negativity with obsessive passion that could prevent people from continuing at such a high level. So we do have sort of a sense of perhaps a survivorship bias happening with obsessive passion. Having said all of that, there is some data to suggest that if you have the right circumstances, if you have the right situation around you, all the negative effects of obsessive passion could go away, and it can actually be a positive thing. So, for example, one of the studies that highlighted this was done by Catherine Amiot and her colleagues at the University of Quebec at Montreal, so where Bob Vallerand is, and they studied hockey players, amateur hockey players. I know you're in Australia, so I'll explain what the landscape is like.
Hockey's not huge.
At least in Canada. Hockey is very huge. I'm not a big hockey fan, but I'm learning about what amateur hockey is like here, and it's very intense. So in the Quebec leagues, when you reach a certain age, there's a selection process. And if you're really, really good, you could get selected to the higher elite levels. And these are the levels that you're aspiring to go to the National Hockey League and be a professional. If you're not so good, you get selected to a lower league. This is a just for fun league. You're not going to progress to the National Hockey League. This is just for fun. Harmonious passion, for those who are selected to the lower leagues, harmonious passion did what it normally does, predicts all these great things, greater adjustment, lower depression, whereas obsessive passion does what it normally does, predicts greater depression, lower adjustment. It's the same story with the lower leagues. Both the very competitive higher leagues, and these are people who their whole life is gravitated around being a hockey player. In some leagues, at least in Manitoba, school is sort of secondary to hockey at these higher leagues, right? School kind of takes hockey takes priority. And usually your school is kind of around your hockey, right? Kind of go to school when you can. But for those who are selected to the higher level leagues, obsessive passion actually predicted better adjustment. These are hockey players who are not as depressed. They had a more higher life satisfaction. They were happier. They were doing better when they were in this highly competitive environment that sort of catered to your obsessive tendencies. So if you're in an environment that caters to your obsessions, your obsessive passion, if everybody's on board, everybody at home's on board, everybody in your activities on board, everybody knows what the deal is, that could be the recipe for success if you have high levels of obsessive passion. When I say this, I'm nervous that people take away, okay, there is a chance that obsessive passion is a good thing. It seems like it's quite rare, right? You have to have the right environment around you. Everything has to be just right for things to be, for obsessive passion to be a positive source of well-being in your life. If the balance gets tilted a little bit, let's say you get an injury, one of those hockey players gets a career-ending injury or a season-ending injury. Everything's revolving around hockey. That could be quite devastating. So it is a riskier situation. So the story is really, for most people, almost all people, harmonious passion would be the way to go. I would say the situations with obsessive passion is a source of wellness in people's lives would be tenuous and pretty rare.
I mean, especially with that role family kind of conflict with the activity and other areas of your life. For example, family, it'd be a lot easier to have less of that conflict, I suppose, if you're in that professional environment where, like you said, your needs are catered for. You've got nutritionists there. If you're a professional athlete at the top level of your game, your partner perhaps doesn't need to work because you're earning, a huge income, and there's less, things can work around your activity, your sport, your profession. Whereas that's not the case for most people who aren't earning the big bucks of a Cristiano Ronaldo or a Michael Jordan, and who have to fit everything in and around that.
Yeah, and most people's passions are not. I mean, people like to read fantasy novels and watch TV shows, right? These are the passions, right? So we're not talking about. It's quite common for people to be passionate about sport and exercise, but most passionate activities are kind of everyday activities that we all do, right? So it's. In the great scheme of things, I think it's quite rare for obsessive passion to be positive in somebody's life.
Are there any circumstances where, obsessive passion can actually lead to better outcomes beyond the kind of professional realm? So, for example, this idea of kind of mixed passions I've seen, it seems to be okay in terms of well-being outcomes, where you've got a little bit of obsessive passion and a little bit of harmonious passion, because it seems to be more on kind of a dimension rather than OP, HP versus, you can have a little bit of both.
Right. So some of the research we've been doing is to look at the level within sort of the distribution of harmonious and obsessive passion that each person has towards the same activity. People aren't just harmoniously passionate or obsessively passionate. People have different levels of both within them. And a lot of people, particularly in sport, because we do most of our research in sport, report high levels of both. They feel harmoniously passionate about playing football, playing soccer, but they also know that there are times of the season, like before playoffs or before a rivalry game or during tryouts, when they feel high levels of obsessive passion. And I think overall on their activity, they can say, yeah, I'm harmoniously passionate, but yeah, I'm also really obsessively passionate too. I'm passionate in all senses of the word. And we've been finding that some people have high levels of obsessive passion for their activity. If that comes with high levels of harmonious passion, if you have high levels of harmonious passion, that seems to be okay. Harmonious passion seems to have this compensatory effect. So as long as you have high levels of harmonious passion, even if you can at times get obsessed about your favorite activity, it seems to be okay. But the most dangerous combination, as you might imagine, is high obsessive passion combined with low harmonious passion. So you have all the maladaptive effects of obsessive passion without any of those compensatory effects of harmonious passion. And that seems to be associated with some pretty bad outcomes. Even worse than people who report low levels of both, low harmonious and low obsessive passion. So if we're seeing, is it okay to be not passionate about something? Well, compared to pure obsessive passion with that high obsessive passion and low harmonious passion combination, there are situations when it's kind of best to not be passionate about something than to be purely obsessed about it.
Yeah, wow, okay. So something's definitely to watch out for if people are kind of recognizing these characteristics of OP and then without the HP that can lead to some of those maladaptive outcomes. And are there ways that people can go about making their passions more harmonious if they do recognize that, I think some of those things, Ben, that you were describing about OP, I definitely identify with those. How can people go about maybe switching or boosting their harmonious levels of passion?
Well, the evidence on sort of what comes before harmonious passion, obsessive passion is not as much as what comes after. There has been some research showing that doing your activity in an autonomy supportive environment can be useful. So any environment supports your sense of control and sense of choice in environment, that can promote more of a harmonious passion. Of course, there's the environment. There's also the person. The person matters too. And some people are predisposed to being more harmoniously passionate or obsessively passionate about certain activities. So if you bring your personality dispositions wherever you go. So there's a person, there's the environment. An interesting idea that's out there that has some evidence that has to do with your psychological need satisfaction and the balance of your psychological need satisfaction in your passionate activity and in your life in general. This is this has been called the need density hypothesis, which states that if you get need satisfaction from an activity, if this activity is satisfying all your psychological needs, you feel connected with other people, feel autonomous, you feel competent, that could be good, but that could be a recipe for disaster and lead to more obsessive passion if that's the only place in your life where you're getting your needs satisfied. So if you're walking around and your needs aren't really satisfied anywhere, you don't feel competent or don't feel connected to anybody in your life. But then when you step on a basketball court, now you feel connected with your teammates, you feel competent. It's a place where I really feel alive. If that's the only place that really satisfies those needs, the evidence is showing that is predictive of obsessive passion, which shows this. It's not necessarily the activity. Focusing on the activity is just one thing to focus on, but we also need to take factors in a person's life into account as well. What's going on outside of the activity, right? Because if people's needs are being satisfied elsewhere, then there's a lower likelihood that obsessive passion will be developed, right? Because you don't need to latch on to this activity because it's the only thing that really sort of satisfies you.
It seems like the real driving factor here is like identity, right? If someone's identity revolves, purely around their activity, they're more likely to become obsessively passionate versus if that activity is one of many things which brings them joy or they derive psychological need satisfaction, that autonomy, the relatedness, the competence in other areas, then it's less likely to become my life is all about this activity and my identity is just hinged purely on this activity.
Yeah, harmonious passion means that this activity is part of your identity. You are a basketball player or Pokemon card collector. But it's not all encompassing. It doesn't take over your complete sense of self, not your whole entire self-concept. You've got other identities. You've got other things going on in your life. With obsessive passion, it really does take over. And like I said, a lot of how you feel about yourself it depends on how you're doing in your activity. They did one interesting study a few years ago with, I don't know if you're familiar with Magic the Gathering. I've never heard, I did not know about this until I read this study. It's a card game and you play with each other and you can kind of win and lose. They measured harmonious and obsessive passion with Magic the Gathering players. And the more obsessed these players were, the more that their self-esteem was really dependent on whether they won or lost the last match. So it's, like you said, it really does take over your identity with obsessive passion.
Yeah, that notion of emotional dependence in the Magic the Gathering example brings to mind the documentary Weight of Gold. Have you watched that? The Olympians. So I only watched it recently. It came out a few years ago, but it's like a deep dive into like Olympians and what happens to them and their well-being after the Olympics, right? You're familiar with it?
No, I like the concept.
Yeah, I'm sure you would have come across the same concept of like what happens to an athlete after a major injury or after they retire. And I can see that if they're obsessively passionate about their activity, their sport, then you're going to have some real identity crises afterwards. You're going to have, who am I if I'm not this athlete? And in, the Weight of Gold, they were talking about the post-Olympic blues or post-Olympic depression. People pour 4 years of in actuality they've been training since they were kids, but in a 4-year cycle everything goes into that sport. They give up their jobs, family, everything revolves around it. People put off having children so that they can compete in the Olympics, and then once it's over they retire. It's like, okay, I'll just put everything into this. Who am I? What am I if I'm not this gymnast, this swimmer?
We haven't done research on that effect, that just on that side about sort of it's all over. We've done more temporary stoppages in an activity and how people respond to those. So our first study on that in this area was in the National Hockey League here, our hockey league. We periodically in the past there's been lockouts when the season stops and we don't know if it's going to resume. And so hockey fans get really distressed when this happens, right? like to watch your team play, and now there's no hockey on. And so we did a study during that period. We also did a study during COVID. So I don't know, it was in March 2020 when there's a game that was going to be played. I think it was Utah Jazz against maybe it's Oklahoma City. They're about to play, and then the game was delayed, and then an announcement came off saying the game is canceled, everybody go home. And then they suspended the basketball season, and we had no idea what was going to happen. And during those 2 periods of time, we recruited hockey fans in the first study and basketball fans in the second study. And basically, we asked them the same questions. We asked, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How are you coping with this? How are you managing this whole ordeal? And the results were basically identical. Obsessive passion predicted more avoidance coping. They tended to avoid news about the lockout or the basketball season. So they didn't want to, don't give me updates, just tell me when it's back on. I don't want to hear about how negotiations are going or about anything about the virus. I just want to know when basketball will be played. And obsessive passion predicted a greater likelihood of turning to drugs and alcohol as a way to cope. So not just general use, but to cope with the lockout or with the season suspension due to COVID.
And this is in fans, not even the players.
This is in the fans. Yeah, this is the fans.
Wow.
So, I mean, it really does show, like, when the season stops abruptly like that, it really is distressing for highly obsessed people. And it'd be fascinating to know how the process goes when, if you're Olympian, you know that the Olympics are going to come and then they're going to go, and that this is your last Olympics. This is kind of it for your career. We have the same thing with university athletes here. They're allowed to play for 5 years. They're not allowed to play after 5 years. So we can see that fifth year coming. How are they coping during that fifth year? And are they sort of preparing beforehand? So that's sort of an interesting sort of topic that we need to research more.
Yeah, I can imagine as an athlete, whether it's university or Olympics, if you're lauded in your community by people, if people look up to you, it's even more intoxicating and can even become more and more part of your identity and who you base yourself upon. So almost like the greater the fanfare, the greater the climb, the greater the fall if you're not prepared. But that seems like a good way to go about it, right? Is to have those things in place, whether it's a career post, Olympics, post, college, athletics, in place, or having, passions outside of the one activity itself, such that when it is over, you have some value and you have some ways in which your needs are being satisfied beyond the activity itself.
It's such an interesting topic because there's a whole area in sports psychology about transitions and about exactly this. Primarily a lot in the United States, a lot of work is being done about how those high-level university athletes, how we can help them transition from being a university athlete to being just a regular person. It doesn't, I feel really uncomfortable with that whole idea. Like, if we need to have this whole transition system plan set up for these athletes to transition from being an athlete to a non-athlete, are we really, or maybe we're isolating them a little bit too much from the real world? Like, we need to teach them how to, enroll in university courses if they're still taking university, because this has all been done for you. How to do other activities, right? There's been stories of athletes who have been prevented by their coaches from doing even things like yoga, right? There's been lots of, or maybe they feel like they can't do other activities because that might impede on their training. Maybe we should be encouraging that a little bit more so we don't have to have a whole transition plan set up so that to help them become normal people again. So it's a very interesting topic.
Yeah, and it's so cutthroat. I mean, like if you're training for a spot on the Olympic bobsled team, which I think was one of the focuses of the weight of gold, like there's only a couple of spots, out of, so many people competing, or same thing if you're trying to get on the swimming team. So I imagine when you're in the throes of your athletic career, you're not really thinking about what's next because you're just so focused on making it, and you need to be because it is so cutthroat. But that's probably not a message that your coaches are going to be, telling you, or the people who need you to be the best athlete you can and whose livelihoods rely on, you being the best athlete you can in that window of your career that you have. But it's probably a message that many people need to hear but aren't hearing.
Yeah, and there's also there's the effects of harmonious passion and obsessive passion. There's also beliefs about obsessive passion and harmonious passion. And if you have a coach who believes that you need to be obsessed to get ahead, then you're going to have a lot of athletes who are obsessed, who think about this all the time, who design their life around the activity. And that seems so. We have a potential for a cycle here where if we think we need to be obsessed to get ahead, then we have athletes who are all really obsessed. And so all the athletes who are obsessed get ahead, and then coaches think you need to be obsessed. So you might have a cycle where it's just sort of perpetuating this idea that obsessive passion is the way to go, even though it'll likely make the transition out of sport or whatever activity you're doing, right? This applies to every activity. Likely make that transition a much harder, much longer, much more difficult. It's unclear if it's going to help you perform. We know it's going to lead to negative emotions and the sense of sort of guilt when you're not doing your activity. So we know there's a lot of bad things that will come with it. Unclear if it's going to help you make the Olympic team. And you got to ask yourself also, is it the uncomfortable question of what are we doing here? Is this worth it, right? To isolate these athletes, to promote obsessive passion in these athletes. I don't know. Is it worth it? That's a little bit of an uncomfortable question, but yeah, it might not be worth it if it's going to be such a. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's such an important topic, and I think one that I've never been a college athlete myself, but certainly I think that young athletes should hear and be aware of, because things don't always go the way you want. And you alluded to the survivorship bias earlier, but all you see is the Michael Jordans, the Cristiano Ronaldos who made it to the top. You also don't hear about the many who didn't make it to the top, who obviously outweigh the percentage of people who eventually make it to the top echelon of their field. I'd love to dive in a bit more as well to the psychological needs, because I can see the self-determination theory handbook in the background there on the shelf. Is that
good eye? Yeah, it sits back there. Yeah.
Nice. In terms of like promoting more harmonious passion in people around you, whether this is like a manager in a workplace or a coach of a junior soccer team, if you're, invested in your people in either of those contexts, is providing an environment where you promote those needs satisfaction, where you, for example, perspective take, ask for people's perspective, give them meaningful choice to promote autonomy, you give positive feedback for competence, or you genuinely care in your people in the workplace as a manager, for example. Can that help foster more harmonious passion for an activity, or does it really need to come from the person itself?
Well, the person is part of it, a small part of it, but part of it, because people bring their own dispositions to their activities. The environment's very important, like you mentioned. So promoting those psychological needs would be very important. Being very autonomy supportive appears to be very important. I would add to that, based on the need density hypothesis, that balance of with it needs in an activity and outside of an activity. So the worst case scenario, I think, would be where we have a manager or an employer who's promoting these psychological needs in a job and is somehow preventing these needs from being satisfied outside of the job. So if you expect people to work long hours so that they can't take up other activities, if you're scheduling work functions after hours, on the weekends, and expecting people to do those, or if you have some sort of schedule where people's hours don't really lend themselves to, you can't really enroll in any other activities on a regular basis because you don't really know when you're going to work, kind of always have to be available. If you can prevent need satisfaction from happening outside the activity, that is sort of a recipe for obsessive passion, because the only place you're getting those needs satisfied by definition is in your workplace, because it's sort of your work is preventing you from being satisfied elsewhere. Best case scenario would be to satisfy those needs in the workplace, but also have a workplace that really promotes and encourages people to pursue other activities. Even once 4:30, 5 o'clock comes around, have a culture where people stop working and they don't reply to emails after that time, because they're busy doing other things in their life that are meaningful and that bring them joy. Some workplaces really have that culture, and some, and I'd say many, do not. And there's this expectation that you're checking your email regularly and that you're kind of available for calls or for emergencies, or they schedule meetings a little bit later, which can really need satisfaction from taking place.
Comes back to that idea of the activity life conflict, right? If they're promoting that kind of check your email all the time, that's going to cause more conflict on work family balance, for example. So that certainly makes sense. And I'm curious from a parent's perspective, Ben. So this is an idea that I read in your research, but I was just kind of speculating on. So in terms of promoting harmonious passions in your child, right? If you're a parent, makes sense to me that you avoid the kind of parent who has the expectation of their child to fulfill their own unfulfilled dreams. So I think I hear this a lot in like a sporting context, right? The parent who, never made it as a soccer player or a basketballer, but heaps all this pressure on their child to do it. Part of them because they want, their child to live this awesome life, but also part of them because, they're driving it for them to fulfill a dream that they themselves as a child never was able to do. Is that one way that perhaps obsessive passion can be promoted, unfortunately, in a child, particularly coming back to the notion of identity, right? Because as a child, your parents' love and attention is important and, one of the most important needs. And if you internalize this as, I'm only being loved or I'm only being valued by my parent when I do well in basketball, when I do well in soccer, then this kind of idea of conditional love becomes apparent, and then the activity just becomes your identity, and then you're on that OP kind of path.
I'm not aware of too much research looking at the direct link between parental behavior and obsessive passion, but anything that promotes feeling pressure to engage in the activity is a recipe for obsessive passion. So if these young children are feeling like they need to do this activity, that is just going to be a recipe for obsessive passion, particularly if they love it, right? That's sort of the sad thing, is that with a passion, don't forget, obsessively passionate people, they love their activity. They spend a lot of time doing it. This is something they love to do, but if you feel like you have to do it, there's that little bit of a pressure that's pushing you towards the activity. That's when more of an obsessive passion will develop. So it seems in terms of parenting and these different activities, it's important to support children. Children need rides to practices and games. They need help, cleaning equipment and organizing things and paying for stuff, right? That seems to be the best thing that parents can do. If a child really loves something, they're gonna find a way to do it. And oftentimes, I think staying out of their way when they pursue something they love is probably the best thing to do.
All right. So that kind of support without it being perceived as pressure. You alluded to this earlier, Ben, about people not having passions, right? So as I understand it, about 20% of people don't have any passions at all, and correct me if I'm wrong. But if people are out there wanting to cultivate passions and feeling like their life is devoid of passions, and they're wanting some more meaning and purpose to be derived somewhat from meaningful activities in their life, are there ways they can go about cultivating passions? And to give a bit of background, I suppose, to this, I remember in my late teens, early 20s, I felt like I was really devoid of passionate activities in my own life and was really looking for more meaning in my own life. And again, I recognize that this doesn't come exclusively from external activities, but I remember the process I went about trying to find my passion was Googling relentlessly how to find passion for hours on end. Certainly kind of got me nowhere. So for those people out there that may be really trying to cultivate more passion in their own life, are there ways that they can go about doing this and cultivating more passionate activities?
Yeah, well, you are correct about 20% or so of people, when you ask them about what's your favorite activity, and then they answer the questions from the passion scale, everybody can identify a favorite activity. So nobody says, I don't know what my favorite. Everybody can say something. But then when you dig a little bit deeper, do you like this activity? Is it part of your identity? About 20% of people say, no, not really. No, I don't really do it that much anymore. We know very, very little about these non-passionate people. Very, very little. But we do know a little bit about people who have lots of passions. So most people, if you ask them to list sort of their favorite activities, and then you probe a little bit deeper, most people have on average 2 to 4 passionate activities in their life. So most people have multiple passions. And like you said, though, lots of people have none, and some people have tons. Passionate people about lots of different things. We've tried to determine sort of who have these multiple passions. What can predict having more than one passion? And we looked at the big 5 personality traits, and the one that consistently predicted was openness to experience. So people who are more open to new things, like to try things, like to sample new activities. Unsurprisingly, these are the people who had more passionate activities. This suggests that one way to find your passion is to act like somebody who has high levels of openness to experience, which means try new things, explore, sample different activities, sample different things, and see what sticks. That's the suggestion by those results. It would be interesting to see if people who adopt, so studying these non-passionate people and asking them to engage in some sort of deliberate sampling procedure, if this can kind of help a year or two later if people have actually found a couple of passions. So we need to do something like that to see if there's any direct evidence of this sort of sampling advice.
Yeah, I love that. I think this idea of trial and error, and I think that was the complete opposite to the path that I was going about it, which was trying to Google my way into a passion. And there's this, I suppose, this idea in pop culture, I think, promoted that sometimes you just get these aha moments, and, thinking your way into passion is a way to go about it. But I think the reality is like you're saying, you need to sample by trialing, iterating, trialing new different things. There's this book, The Dark Horse. Have you heard of it by Todd Rose? No, okay, because you're alluding to a lot of the language they use, but they have this metaphor of like gradient ascent, which is just like, imagine when you're trialing an error, when you're trialing and iterating, you're climbing kind of a mountain, and then you look from your new vantage point, you look around, and then you see a different mountain, a higher mountain with a better view. You come off your mountain, you go to a different mountain, and you're kind of, sampling these different views and vantage points. And I think that speaks a lot to the idea of, sampling diversely, particularly while you're young and have the opportunity to do so, developing and cultivating a passion rather than thinking your way into it.
Yeah, and a strategy could also be to try different activities that serve similar needs to activities that you can no longer do. So sometimes, talking about high-level athletes, they're very competitive, and then they retire and they no longer play their sport. But a lot of I've known some people who have retired from sport, and now they're incredible golfers. They spend a lot of time on the golf course because they've channeled all that competitive energy into golf. This is something you can do. It's very challenging, and this is one of their passions now. They've kind of substituted one passion in for another, right? That satisfies similar needs. It's not the same as playing their old sport, but it can do the job. So something like that could also be sort of a good strategy too.
The big question, Ben, that I alluded to at the start of the conversation that I ask a lot of other researchers, which I'm very excited to put to you as a researcher in psychology of passion, is do you think that doing a career that you're passionate about is sound advice, and that everyone should, if they have the opportunity, try and cultivate a career that amalgamates and molds well with their passions?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it would be nice if everybody could do that. Some people's passions, like I said, these are everyday activities that people are passionate about. Reading mystery novels, like I said, watching movies. These are the activities that people love to do. They look forward to them. It gives them a sense of joy in life. But it's really an economic question, right? Is there an economy for people to make a living reading mystery novels? You know what I mean? And I don't think you need to. I don't think, it'd be lovely to have a career where you're passionate about it and you can earn a living doing it. I think people should be able to pursue their passions outside of a career in their leisure time, which, like I said, a lot careers and companies are better at promoting that than others. But I think it's an economic question about what exactly you're passionate about. And I don't want to be naive here and say that everybody can follow their passion and live the life they want to live. I think it's okay to have a passion and not have that passion be a source of income, because positive thing in your life, right? Even if it's not a source of income.
I think you alluded to something really important there about the social conditions as well, when you said economy, but, some people don't have the freedom to follow their passions as well. If you live in a less liberal society where, for example, I think like in Iran, women can't sing in public, or like there's some restrictions around, the types of people that they can like sing in front of. And, if singing is your passion, then that's kind of significantly curtails it if you're a woman living in Iran. So I suppose, I feel like in Australia, I'm very lucky in the sense that if you want to become a personal trainer, a hairdresser, if you want to do these things as a career, there are ample opportunities and freedom socially to do so, but that's not the case for everyone.
Yeah, your passion should be something that you just want to pursue. And even if you're not being paid for it, ideally it's a harmonious pursuit that can be a source of wellness in your life. And yeah, at a certain point, like it does require for lots of activities, requires a little bit of a nice sort of a safety net or a sense of privilege. There's got to be some privilege involved to pursue a lot of passions. I really don't think that should be the end goal for people. I think if you have a passion outside of your work, that'll help you inside your work, because you have this thing to look forward to. When the workday ends, you can do your activity, and when you're doing your activity, to a sense of flow and absorption. So it could be, I think following your passion is not possible for a lot of, like you said.
I was having a look through the cultural influences on passion, and I don't think that you've directly researched this, but correct me if I'm wrong. I was having a look through a couple of studies and seeing whether, for example, in Eastern versus more Western cultures, the way that passions are viewed is different. And a couple of studies, this one by O'Keefe et al. In 2021 seems to highlight that in Eastern cultures, passions are still important, at least particularly from a career perspective, but overall, but are less so than in Western cultures. And in fact, in this particular study, Americans compared to Singaporeans, doing your passion more often was more predictive of life satisfaction in the American sample than it was in the Singaporean sample. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on kind of the cultural influences on the way we view passion are.
I can talk a little bit about the lay beliefs that people have and how these might differ. And I could talk about cultures and sort of cultures within cultures. Some of the research we've done, some of the research we've done has been people's lay beliefs about obsessive passion and about where they think it's best, where they think obsessive passion is actually a good thing. One of the things that we found is that in situations when people believe that sort of a job needs to get done at any cost, so it's called a bottom line mentality. So any sort of culture that promotes having a bottom line mentality. So all that matters is the bottom line, getting the job done. However the job gets done, that's the way to do it. People believe that obsessive passion is what is needed. So people will, if they're applying for a job in a company that has a bottom line mentality, they'll actually portray themselves as being more obsessed about that job to try to get the job. And people will select more obsessed people for that type of job. So there's some cultural differences within the North American culture about what they believe is needed to succeed. In terms of the broader sense of culture, East versus West, Singapore versus North America, I'm not going to give you too much here. I'll leave it to other people to speak to that because sort of outside of my realm.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the honesty. That's interesting, this bottom line mentality. So people project a certain image of themselves to get a job that they think will be more desirable.
Right. Yeah. We asked them. So pretend you're applying for a job, and then we asked them to answer questions from the passion scale in a way that they thought would get them the job. And then some of the jobs we told them were kind of have this bottom line mentality where, all that matters is productivity and profits, employee well-being, not a huge concern. You just need to get the profits up. And then in those cases, people said, yeah, I'm really, really obsessed compared to other job descriptions. So there seems to be the culture of a employer can promote more obsessive passion, and then you can get into a spiral where you have a bunch of obsessive passion people who are hired, and that can promote more obsessive passion.
Yeah, cool. I'll have a look into that. Yeah. Any final words of advice, Ben, for listeners? Anything you wanted to leave listeners with?
I think it's okay to be harmoniously passionate about what you're doing. That's, as we discussed, that could be a conclusion that they think, but I got to be obsessed to get ahead. And I'm like, well, the data say that really you can be harmoniously passionate and also get ahead. It's okay to be passionate about something, but also have a life outside of your activity. So that would be the broad takeaway message.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's going to be very relatable for many people. And like I said, that was the message I had coming in before reading your research. So it's already shifted the way that I view my own work. So it's been, fantastic experience speaking with you today, listening to your advice and takeaways from all the research you've done. I think there's going to be a ton of value for listeners, for students on the way that we conceptualize our passions, our activities that we love moving forward. So thank you for your time and sharing your wisdom today, Ben.
Thanks for having me.